Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back and welcome in to our What Boys Need as Males conference. I am so honored to introduce Dr. David Geary. I don't think we've ever actually met personally, though we've been on boards and things together, and so seen on Zoom. So Dr. Geary has published a number of books. Two that have profoundly influenced my work are Male Female, and then also Sex Differences. He's foundational for me. His work is foundational in all of his research, and his team. Really, you have a team of researchers. I think this is
Mhm.
foundational to the kind of work that we at the Geary Institute do.
Mhm.
Um, because we're so into looking at male female brain. So it's an honor to have you, David, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Michael. So, as my title states here, we're going to be talking about men's pathways to success in the modern world, taking an evolutionary perspective on that. Oops, something's wrong. There we go. So, I want to kind of step back and take a broader perspective on men's success, taking into consideration both evolutionary issues as well as a cross-cultural framework. I'm going to touch on sex differences in social development and early development because this relates to later issues about men, boys, and men integrating into a already established male hierarchy or network. I'll provide an evolutionary cross-cultural rationale as to why this broader approach is important. Give a few examples of how it relates to boys' behavior in a modern context, and then a couple of implications for promoting men's success, boys and men's success um, in modern contexts. So, men's most fundamental and universal motivation is to achieve some level of cultural success. I like the word cultural success because it's not context specific, it's a universal motivation. And what this means is being good at something that is important in that society. That can range from owning herds of sheep or goats or cattle or whatever, have good hunting skills, be a good farmer, whatever it is, to high income in the modern world. Um, Through achieving cultural success, they get some type of social respect and they have some level of control over culturally important resources. So they have a reasonable income, they have reasonably good hunting returns, and so forth. So generally, I argue in the book that Michael mentioned, men have evolved to attempt to organize their social world and their life trajectory in ways that increase their social status and influence within the wider communities in which they live and attempt to gain access to and control of culturally important resources. By control, I don't mean despotic control. What I mean is they want to be good at something that is important in that society that leads them to have a certain level of resources that make them good marriage partners and that give them respect in that context. So the reasons for this is very clear. Throughout history and across modern day hunter-gatherer, pastoral, agricultural, and developed societies, men who achieve cultural success have better marriage prospects. They have more children. Their children are healthier um, relative to their less successful peers. Less successful males are at high risk of dying unmarried and childless. So there is a very, very consistent relation across context between being successful in your cultural context and marriage prospects, engagement in the culture and so forth. Now, critically, the drive for cultural success can be expressed in different ways. Uh, we have Hobbes there, and he discussed life being short and brutish, and life was rough at times during our history. And that reflects a dominance-based status striving. That's use of force or threat of force to gain status and to achieve resource control. Any honest look at history, and we'll see many examples of that. And in fact, that's the norm for male mammals when in species where males are very competitive with one another, dominance related status striving is essentially the given. There are no other options. However, people can also achieve success through prestige-based status striving. That's acquiring culturally important skills that benefit others. So, good hunter that shares his proceeds, for example, and results in the free conferral of status and respect. So that is developing skills that are culturally important, will lead to success in adulthood, and that success will give men the status and respect that they really want. This is unique to humans, but requires socialization. It's not going to just automatically happen without others moving it along in the right direction. So that's my point here. The paths that boys and later men will take will be influenced by cultural factors, including their integration into existing male groups and hierarchies. So that's the norm across more traditional societies that the boys will eventually get integrated into the male network and make contributions in the context of that network. Without these cultural guardrails, which are essentially rules against dominance-based status driving, rules against bullying, aggression, and so forth, and guidance by benevolent men in the society, those who have the boys' interests at heart, and that includes their fathers, adolescent boys and young men can veer into violence or apathy. Um, and so they're not automatically going to check into what's important for that society. Some boys will figure it out, but many won't. And they need these um, male networks and groups to push them in the right direction. This path begins actually during the preschool years. And during this time, we begin to see boys and girls segregate into different social worlds. So you begin to see boys hanging out with boys and playing with boys, and girls hanging out with girls and playing with girls. This is driven by differences in social styles. So other girls are more responsive to verbal requests, polite requests, those types of things, and are not particularly responsive to um, attempts to get them to engage in rough and tumble play, for example. Friendships form differently in boys and girls, and they are maintained differently. This is a huge socialization process, beginning probably between 2 and 3 years of age. By the time they're 11, so by the end of the elementary school years, kids on average are spending 11 hours in same-sex peer groups for every 1 hour they spend in mixed sex groups. So in the figure there, what I have is a social network analysis from a Caribbean village. Um, a anthropologist colleague of mine, when I mentioned these patterns here, he said, well, the kids in this village just run around all over the place and there's boys and girls. And he said he didn't see it. Um, but we co-mentored a graduate student who went in and did a network analysis, asked, okay, who's friends with who's going to stick up with who's going to lend, somebody something that they need, and so forth. And when you do this analysis, this is what you get. The boys are the darker color, the girls are the lighter color. The size of the squares is basically the age of the kid, very clearly a differentiation between boys and girls, although apparently it's not obvious if you just look at them running around during the day. So there's massive socialization occurring during early childhood all the way up through adolescence, and then it actually continues through adolescence. This exaggerates sex differences in communication styles and friendship patterns, but is essential for both sexes' social development. Being isolated from, the sex typical group has long-term psychological and social consequences for both boys and girls. So they need the same-sex relationships. It's basically preparing them for the types of relationships that they would encounter in adulthood in more traditional societies. So, girls network is a whole different talk. I'll focus here on boys. Boys organize themselves into hierarchical, focused groups. So there is a hierarchy there. Somebody takes charge and everybody knows their place, but they're all happy to be in the group. And the group is usually focused on something. These groups often, as you might imagine, start chaotically. There's a lot of jostling, sometimes fighting and so forth to figure out, okay, who's going to be the alpha here, the beta, and so forth. But once they figure out the hierarchy and everybody's good with it, everybody knows their place, what they need to do to achieve this particular goal, whatever it might be, these groups become very integrated. The boys, especially even in adolescence, are actually very supportive of their teammates, helping them out, and they provide a lot of support, which a lot of people miss because boys' relationships are not the same as girls, and it's not as obvious that they're providing emotional support. But in the context of these groups, once they're all settled, they do that. This is critical to boys' social and emotional health. So, observational and using other methods, Lever, sociologist, stated, this is study at play, more often boys compete as members of teams and must simultaneously coordinate their actions with those of their teammates while taking into account the action and strategies of their opponents. Boys interviewed expressed finding gratification in acting as a representative of the collectivity. The approval or disapproval of one's teammates accentuates the importance of contributing to a group victory. This is in the context of sports, but it also could be finishing a work project or a college project, whatever the case might be. Being part of one of these groups is really important um, for guys' development. So this early socialization prepares them for integration into men's groups. And the men's groups have the same basic structure and social rules as the boys' groups, because these men have gone through the exact same process in their childhood. In traditional groups, pastoral groups, hunter-gatherer, whatever the case might be, boys are also socialized to be respectful of older men. So they're going to respond to the older guys in the group, typically look up to these men, and are eventually integrated into the men's hierarchy. Integration is often preceded by some rite of passage that can occur in childhood, more often sometime during adolescence, and the rites of passage vary a bit, but going through it is an important ritual for these guys to go through. It signals to them and to the broader community that this individual is now considered a man, that he now has adult-like responsibilities, even though it may not be full male responsibilities initially. But in any case, once passed, they begin to take on culturally important resources under the direction of older, more skilled men. So the same type of support, integration, and so forth that we see in the self-forming adolescence groups, we now see in the context of the older male groups, the older men's groups. In cultures with frequent between group hostilities, boys are socialized to be aggressive, which makes sense in that context. But this is redirected in societies with more prestige-based forms of cultural success. So the goal here is not to suppress boys' rough and tumble activities and rambunctiousness and other types of activities, um, but they do need to be redirected toward culturally important culturally appropriate ways of achieving success. This is not going to automatically happen for many boys. Many boys, probably most, will need to be integrated into an existing culturally important male social network in order to develop the skills and to learn the appropriate behaviors for being successful in that culture, especially if it's a prestige-based culture. In traditional groups and developing societies, boys who do not have male kin to sponsor their integration into the male network and promote the acquisition of culturally important skills have reduced marriage prospects and are at risk of downward social mobility. So, even though I'm taking an evolutionary perspective here, we're slow developing species, individuals. The cultural component is very important, and guys are going to respond to older men integrating them into the network and getting them on task. But if those men aren't there doing it, there's going to be issues, as I'm going to say here in a minute. So, in economically developed nations such as our own, boys without this supportive male network are at increased risk of dropping out of school, dropping out of high school, engaging in delinquent and criminal activities. Now, this not only includes their fathers or their uncles or whoever it might be, it includes a network of men in their entire community. So you need an entire group of men that are focused on something that is culturally important. If guys aren't integrated into these networks, um, they're at higher risk of a variety of negative behaviors for themselves and for the communities in which they live. The socialization process includes, as I stated, male kin, typically dad, but it could be uncles or older brothers or whoever, as well as other men in the neighborhood or the wider social network. So, as noted, boys are going to and men are going to organize into large hierarchical and activity-focused groups. Guys bond by doing things together and being successful in those activities. They do not bond in the same way that girls and women do, that is, talking about issues that are important to them and so forth. They need to be active, integrated in a group, and we need the broader culture, the men in that broader culture, to push those group activities in ways that are going to prepare these guys for later life and to be successful in that culture. So their early um, activities provides a natural context for socializing boys to become culturally successful if led by competent men. This can start in elementary school, but it's especially important in adolescence. This is when boys, the testosterone hits in, the puberty and all that. Boys' status driving spikes up during that, probably mid-adolescence or so. Risk-taking behaviors increase considerably. The potential for aggression increases, so forth. This is also the high risk period where they could kind of veer off into delinquent or criminal activities or just plain apathy in checking out. These can be team sports, something like the former Boy Scouts, which is now mixed sex, or related male-only groups. These groups don't need to sit around and talk about things. They need to do something together that has a positive outcome for the group. So these involve collective activities that provide a means for boys to gain respect. So getting respect by other boys and men is incredibly important for guys. And we want them to gain respect by improving their skills, improving their leadership abilities or technical skills or whatever the case might be. There has to be an avenue for them to focus on and get better, and in that way improve their status and gain more respect within the group. Could be athletic skills, could be mechanical skills, in Boy Scouts, different ranks, whatever the case um, the case might be, whatever is good for the individual guy. So I want to note here that mixed sex groups function differently and are not likely to be as effective as male-only groups. Female friendships and female social networks work differently. There's different explicit rules, and more importantly, there's different implicit rules about how these relationships are organized, how they're maintained, how the group functioning. It's more equality based and then hierarchical based, so forth. That is not going to work for these guys. They need to be there fine with inequality. They work well in a hierarchy. Hierarchies are very effective because having a competent leader helps with the coordinated activity of the individuals in that group toward achieving whatever goal it is they're um, trying to achieve. So, absent direction of supportive men, many adolescent boys are at risk of forming antisocial or otherwise dysfunctional groups of their own. So, there's this natural self-organization that emerges in childhood. And if they don't have older, more competent individuals directing that to some extent, and sometimes to a large extent, they're going to probably self-organize on their own and possibly, or in fact, I think a lot of times in ways that are not in their best long-term interest and not in the best long-term interest of the communities in which they reside. So integration into male groups is part of the socialization process in early integration into society. This is, as far as I've seen, a human universal. Success in economically developed nations is going to require more than this. Being part of a basketball team is fine, but that in and of itself is not sufficient because you're not developing culturally important skills that are going to be really useful in adulthood. So we need to require also promoting academic competencies and completing a rigorous high school curriculum. Lots of labor economic studies showing that it's not whether you graduate high school or not, or college, or what your grades are. It's what your actual reading, writing, mathematics, and other types of skills are. And so just getting guys through high school um, with weak standards is not in their long-term best interest. Pushing them to do better um, is going to be necessary. So they need skills to achieve prestige, status, and respect in the modern world. Otherwise, many will disengage from society. And we see that now, as probably everyone here knows, with a lot of young men have left the labor force, or they're in and out, and they're not really engaged in the wider society, and they're not preparing themselves to be a good marriage partner, or they resort to a dominant strategy. They drift into delinquent and criminal activities. Oops. Yep, that's right. So building skills that support a broad path to prestige-based status will require some modifications, in my opinion, of the educational system. So I'm just going to give a few examples here. Um, Reading is an area in which boys consistently lag girls, and this begins in the preschool years, and the gap gets bigger all the way through high school and college. This contributes to the sex difference in enrollment in higher education. So if we improve boys' reading scores, we would probably get more men in higher ed. So I think addressing this will require a number of changes. But to start with, it would have to start with basic instruction, phonemic awareness, word decoding. These are things you would start in kindergarten or even preschool types of things. More boys than girls struggle with this. Struggling students, which will include some girls, are going to need more direct, explicit instruction on that. and more reading material that is appealing to boys' interests. I think at one point, maybe better now, that was thought that, well, if you give boys books about spies and war and conflict and other sorts of things, it's going to make them more aggressive. And that's not true. It's just going to, those are the things that guys are interested in. It's going to get them reading more. Maybe an even important, or at least equally important thing, is that boys and men's advantages in spatial and mechanical abilities are unassessed and underappreciated in schools. These abilities, ability to understand how engines work, for instance, how objects can be used as tools and so forth, these contribute to many white collar and many blue collar STEM fields. These are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They're especially important for the technology engineering fields. Blue collar would be something like, a large engine mechanic or something like that. White collar would be an engineer. So there's been studies of boys who have who where their individual strength is spatial mechanical skills. So even if they're good at math and reading, some guys are still going to be better at the spatial mechanical sorts of things. And these guys, and with a few girls in there, who excel in these areas are generally less engaged in school in high school. They're less likely to attend college, even if they have strong reading and math competencies. So their strength is overlooked in a lot of school settings. And even though they have the skills to go to college, it's not really their primary interest, and they just don't think there's anything in it for them. So we're losing a lot of um, talented guys uh, in this area because it's just not sufficiently addressed in schools. So boys' advantages in spatial and mechanical abilities align with their interests in things in mechanical systems. So this is a study done with Heesbert Stoet, a colleague of mine in the UK. We looked at about 475 adolescents across 80 countries. This is part of PISA, International Academic Assessment, and they um, responded in terms of what type of job would you like to be doing when you're 30 years old? And they're about 15, 16 at the time they did this. And then the organization that did the test went through and classified all of those occupations. And then we looked at those occupations as things related occupations or people related occupations. The diagonal line there is the line of equality, meaning that if these big distributions overlap that, there would be no sex difference. The green shows the sex difference in thing-oriented occupations, interest in that. And, countries differ a lot. In some countries, the sex difference is large. In other countries, it's smaller. But there's not a single country anywhere in the world where there are as many girls as boys who are really interested in these types of jobs, mechanical jobs, HVAC jobs, engineering jobs, a whole variety of types of things. The pink there is people-oriented things like physician, teacher, so forth, where you're engaging with people and you're engaging in an activity that helps these people. Um, so it's a little bit different than in entrepreneur, for example. But in any case, we see the same pattern there. The magnitude of the sex difference varies quite a bit across countries, but there's not a single country in which there are as many boys as girls who are interested in these types of occupations. So the blue there, the side that says STEM occupations, that includes a lot of the things, occupations, but also includes occupations like mathematics that doesn't necessarily involve dealing with things. And we see the same pattern. There's a lot of variation across countries in terms of the magnitude of the sex difference, but there's not a single country in which there are as many girls as boys who are interested in these types of occupations. We reviewed the literature on this, and we see the exact same pattern in large-scale studies conducted in the U.S. More than 100 years ago. So this is a very stable difference, and it's not really well addressed in a lot of school settings. So there is a long history of trade and industry courses in U.S. high schools, but this has declined. But this declined with focus on academic skills in the 80s. Now, as I said before, academic skills are important. Even if you want to go into engineering or mechanics or whatever, you still need to have good reading skills. And then after the academic push, there was college for all, and that led to a de-emphasis on these types of course trajectories. So the result was a neglect of boys' spatial mechanical advantages in schools, and this has resulted in mixed opportunities to better prepare them for things-oriented professions. Now, a lot of these things-oriented professions um, have lost jobs, like high-level manufacturing have lost jobs, but the U.S. Department of Labor and some of the organizations that put out surveys on these sorts of things note that there are hundreds of thousands of open positions in things-oriented um, positions, carpentry, HVAC, related types of occupations that are looking for individuals to fill those positions. So those jobs are out there, but the boys who would be good at those and be interested in those, they're not being well served by the current educational system. So these are guys, as I mentioned before, that are at high risk of disengagement from schooling in general, not only high school as well as not going to college, even if they have very good academic skills, because it's not really their interest. So increasing these opportunities and reorganizing them to capitalize on boys' desire to compete as part of a team might be helpful. I think competing teams building robots, modifying engines, or whatever, so they're integrated as part of a group. They're doing something that is building skills that will later be useful in the labor market. I think prior attempts to capitalize on boys' desire to be part of these groups and have competent men in their lives have focused on athletics and stuff. I think that's important, but it's not building the skills that they're going to need as adults. So we need to add to those strategies. So summary, I guess I went a little quicker than I thought. Um, Boys and young men need pathways to cultural success. They need to find a niche in society, whatever that niche is, that confers some level of prestige. People are respect and respect. People respect what they do and what skills they have. And this will make them an attractive marriage partner. Part of the decline in marriage rates in the US right now and in Western cultures is driven by the drop in the number of blue collar men who have good jobs and are making enough money to support a family or contribute significantly to the family. Those jobs are out there, but we're not preparing enough men to go into those jobs. Many boys will veer off this path without guidance from high-functioning men, including their dads or uncles, whoever it is there, in the wider community. And it's usually not just the dads. If the dads are integrated in with a larger social network, um, uh, all the better for all of them. In many contexts, this socialization occurs in part by in the context of task-oriented same-sex groups that are guided by men. These can manifest in many ways, sports, building projects, and so forth. I think that's part of the early socialization process in terms of how you behave in a social context and um, how you get respect from others. You get it by building skills and doing things that helps the group, not just being a bully, for example. Um, they should be goal oriented, and some of them at least need to provide an avenue to develop skills that will lead to prestige and result and respect. That is a good job when they hit adulthood. In developed economies, prestige-related skills depend on schooling, and schools aren't fully meeting the needs of many boys. More can be done to promote the development of academic skills where boys are at risk of falling behind. Reading is an important part of that. And as I said, the spatial mechanical skills are also important. We can help boys by developing more of that type of academic track. Social attitudes like toxic masculinity are a big negative. These are only going to alienate boys from cultural institutions and potentially create a disaffective and disruptive social movement. Guys have the potential to self-organize in ways that aren't necessarily in the wider society's best interest. They need to be steered toward culturally appropriate ways of gaining prestige and respect. And I finished early, so I'm
Ah,
ready for questions.
well, that was
I think that's
wonderful. Um, so following up on let's follow up on the last thing you were talking about.
Mhm.
The how can we're in a society that to some extent, correct me if you think I'm wrong about this, to some extent it just doesn't want to see what what you uh what you're talking about, right? It
Right.
just doesn't want to see that males need, let's say, males actually need to enter into task focused and purpose and and rites of passage and
Right.
I mean, would you say that our society doesn't want to see that? Am I wrong?
I think they don't want to see it. I think a lot of gender activists see this as a zero sum um, proposition that resources that go into helping boys are resources that are not going to be available to help girls. And so, getting girls into, appropriate tracks in life is a good thing, but not. But we need to do the same thing for boys, and I think you're exactly right. The current culture doesn't want to hear this and is doing a terrible job at it.
Hmm. Yeah, and Christina Summers was talking who and sort of gave the history of how this has been emerging over the last like 40 to 50 years,
Yeah.
this sort of blindness. And it's dangerous, isn't it? I mean, some of what you're saying here is this is dangerous not to raise these guys well.
It is dangerous, and we've seen that previously in history, in Germany in the 1920s after their currency collapsed, and yeah, it is dangerous, and I think maybe the only reason we haven't seen more problems with self-organizing guys is because of the internet, video games, drugs, and that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future, especially if the economy really tanks.
Mm, yeah. There's a conversation in the chat. There's been a couple conversations. I want to
Okay.
ask you a question about each one of them is around testosterone. So,
Sure.
um, uh, John is pointing out in the chat testosterone spikes. Of course, there are surges of it every day, right, during puberty
Right.
and
Mhm.
adolescence,
Sure.
and goes up 10 times. And and then there's a discussion about does testosterone lead to violence, or so. Let's talk about testosterone.
Okay.
Uh, what um, testosterone and aggression obviously are connected.
Mhm.
High testosterone and violence, though, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but there's a
Mhm.
difference, right, between talking about
Right.
testosterone and aggression and testosterone
Right.
and violence.
Right. Yeah. So the correlation between basal levels of testosterone for adolescents or young adults and aggressive behavior like bullying is actually it's positive, but it's small, like 0.1 something or so. For humans, for guys, testosterone increases status striving. And in some contexts, status driving will lead to aggression and dominance related strategies. So there is a potential for that. And that's how it works with most other, probably all other mammals. But with the right socialization and doing the sorts of things I'm discussing here, that status striving can be redirected into culturally important and culturally beneficial activity. So testosterone is not the problem. The problem is that it needs to be that status driving, risk taking, and wanting to achieve and excel and get respect has to be guided by the community.
Okay. Yeah, so the AMA about 28, 29 years ago started talking about the disease of violence. That violence actually is uh, there's an etiology to it. It's the disease of violence, and it's different than aggression. It's the
Right.
disease of violence, and it sounds like are you sounds like you're sort of saying, look, if you don't socialize these guys well, that can happen. Is
Right.
that what?
Yeah. I mean, most of the violence, assaults and those sorts of things occur um, in a small percentage of guys. And so even without these guardrails, most guys aren't going to become physically violent, but a certain number of them will without these guidelines. And those that don't are not going to reach their potential. They could just check out of society or get into other activities that are not in their long best term interest and not in the long best long-term interest of society.
Yeah, and the number of guys who are violent, as you're saying, isn't actually very high.
That's right. That's right. The repeat offenders there's a lot of studies on this looking at kids, boys and girls from early childhood up through adulthood, and it is a small percentage of individuals that engage in most of the criminal activities.
Yeah. Yeah, is that is part of what has happened to the culture and it's sort of basically being anti-male or anti-evolutionary biology or whatever we want to call it is part of it that that imagery has made the male violence rate appear as if it's 50% of guys.
Yeah, it's not. It's more like 5% of guys. Yeah, I think the chance for bias, media reporting, like you see a plane crash and you watch it on the news and then you can remember what it looked like and so forth. That greatly exaggerates your perceived risks of flying when the actual risks are actually very low. So in anything that's done over and over again in the media, social media, on the news, or whatever it might be, is going to seem more common than it typically is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, here's something in the chat. I think we're seeing a lot of men in their 20s and 30s right now who have not been guided into positive pathways to success, like you're talking about, David, and who have organized into destructive online groups, as well as many currently acting out on our fellow Americans by enlisting in ICE. They think they have found prestige in their role, but what we're seeing are gross displays of lack of empathy. Okay, let's do the first part, the destructive online groups. You're obviously you're seeing that that exists out there too.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, as I've stated here a number of times, boys and men are going to self-organize. They're going to look for a group, whatever group that is, that fits their interests, their beliefs, and so forth. And if we don't guide them into good, culturally productive niches, a lot of guys are gonna go into these groups. As I understand it, the vast majority of them, they just kind of stay in those groups and they don't really do anything. But a certain percent are certainly um, at risk for acting out.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of the online groups, interestingly, are in what we call the manosphere, which the media has made into one labyrinth. But a
Mhm.
lot of what's going on there is what you're talking about is people trying to train boys, young men, like
Mhm.
to dress better, right? To
Right.
you know what I mean? You've probably looked at that, or have you?
I never did, but I teach a sex differences course, and I've had some students ask me questions about it. So I have looked at a few things. I don't
Yeah.
think I've seen any of the extreme stuff, but a lot of it is like, how do you make yourself more attractive to women? Which is going to be a question, an issue that's important to a lot of guys. Probably not any harm there. But really what's going to make them more attractive is them getting skills and getting a good job.
Yeah, to some extent, it is, as you said, it's really about gotta climb the hierarchy,
That's right.
right? That's how you get noticed. If you want to mate, you gotta climb the hierarchy. And maybe people don't like that. Maybe we should talk about that. I'm scanning through. Let me just ask you as I scan through
Hmm.
our dislike over the last 50 years of hierarchy development, um, which is a concept in evolutionary biology, right? Hierarchy
Right.
development is evolutionary biology.
Right.
Our culture dislikes it. Um, uh, and that dislike, uh, can we talk about that? Is that like a reaction to patriarchy, or how did this dislike happen?
Right. Well, I think humans can organize themselves in a couple of different ways, equality being one. And I think women are more biased toward that because their friendship groups and their BFF relationships are more equality based than they are in guys. And that has a place in many contexts. Hierarchies can go from, fascism to a well-functioning team that gets a lot of important things done very efficiently. So if you tear down hierarchies, you're losing a lot. And I think the perceived threats of these are overblown. And
Mm-hmm.
they're necessary. Big organizations, any big organization needs a hierarchy.
Yep. Okay. And then two comments that are right next to each other,
Mhm.
um, that are connected. Men are told, John Barry from England, men are told constantly they need to talk about their feelings. So then they join online chat groups and talk about how they feel. And onlookers freak out and tell them to shut up. It's a double bind. Okay, that's very stark language. But in a way, that's sort of what we're kind of talking about, right?
Yeah, and we see that this problem actually in developmental psychology, and there's a subset of social development, peer relations literature. Um, and a lot of times the boys are uh, characterized as having social deficits because they're not sharing their feelings, they're not talking about their personal experiences and providing the types of social emotional support that are more common in girls' groups. And that's a complete misunderstanding of how boys develop friendships and relationships. They develop friendships and relationships by being organized into a group that's doing something together. Um, so, talking to a best friend about feelings or upset about, sure, guys do that. Sometimes it's important for them to do that, but that's not the primary mechanism through which guys develop friendships with other guys. They need to do things, they need to have some activity together that has a particular goal. Um, and I think then you forcing guys to talk about things makes them uncomfortable, and then maybe they talk about things that, yeah, you didn't really want to hear. But probably, I think, is just a misunderstanding. Guys aren't developing relationships that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. John Gray says men, yes, encouraged to share feelings, and that can lead to producing more estrogen and lowering testosterone levels. Have you looked at that at all, David? The estrogen and testosterone mix? I don't know if you have.
Yeah. So, yeah. Testosterone is very, very interesting. It is, it's spiking up in adolescence. It goes up, 20-fold actually from childhood, where it's close to zero. Um, and it's pushing status driving. The guys with higher testosterone in early adulthood are actually more likely to be achievement oriented, get a job, get married earlier. And once they get married and have kids, their testosterone drops and their status driving and all of the potential aggression, all of that really drops considerably. So having guys having this, focusing their behavior on achieving something, getting skills that are going to make them an attractive marriage partner, um, will actually lead to lower testosterone later on in less potential problematic behavior. But they need to
Yeah, and
get to that point.
marriage and having kids increases their oxytocin, right? Which is
Yeah, yeah, and their prolactin, and there are
prolactin,
a variety of other hormonal
right?
changes that occur there. Having a good relationship with a spouse will lower their testosterone as well. They're switching from a mating competing strategy to a providing family strategy.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, and then someone, Jean says yes, and sometimes women pretend they want their boyfriends and husbands to talk about their feelings, but can also turn around and reject this often healthy form of male vulnerability as weakness.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
meant male expression.
yeah, yeah.
Male expression as weakness. Okay, thank you.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think guys, going back to the first part of my talk, all of the early socialization about friendships, relationships, and so forth, a huge part of it is in these peer groups. And these peer groups are segregated by sex. So guys learn one way of forming relationships, talking about issues that they have, or working through issues that they have. And girls have a different way of doing that. They don't, the government doesn't send people pamphlets and saying, well, this is how girls do it and this is how boys do it. And so they don't know. I mean, they kind of figure it out, bumble around in adolescence and early adulthood, figure that out. And some people never figure that out. And I think sometimes the desire for women to have guys talk about their feelings is to have a relationship like they have with their best friend, same sex best friend. And guys just don't, if you want a guy to talk about stuff, get him in an activity. Don't do a face-to-face with him because that's a threat status type. Direct eye contact is a threat in male primates. Off to the side, there's a variety of ways you can do it. And I think if the guys do seem too vulnerable, then he is less attractive to her as a potential partner because the guy is supposed to, in many protect and provide. The protection thing, I think we miss because it's not as critical as it is, but in the real world, in more natural context, that is an important part of it. And guys who come across as weak are going to come across as being low status in the male hierarchy. And if he's low status in the male hierarchy, he's not um, attractive. So the women are going to look for guys who are going to move up that hierarchy and stay there.
Yeah. Okay, and then here's a comment. Seems also like as economies like ours become increasingly dependent on technology, there becomes less need for bronze over brains,
Yeah.
which hurts mechanically gifted young men.
Mhm.
Take automated truck driving. That alone could eliminate tens of thousands of good-paying jobs for blue-collar men.
Right.
With the increasing dominance of big tech, there will be fewer jobs for men.
hmm Well, yeah, there may be fewer white collar jobs too with AI. I think we'll find out in the next few years. But I did look this up, the number of skilled blue collar jobs available, and there's hundreds of thousands of open positions in the U.S. right now that don't have people who are adequately trained for them. Some of those jobs may disappear in the future, but some of them may not, and some of them may. There new ones like maintaining robots may appear.
Yeah, yep. Well, I my sort of my takeaway from listening to you is we wish evolutionary biology would go away, but it will not.
Will
So we
not.
have to understand it. Would that
Right.
be a takeaway?
Yes, we have to understand the nature of the beast, what we're dealing with, and how to direct boys and young men into the most productive paths we can put them on for them and for society as a whole.
Mm, beautiful, brilliant. David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And really just awesome to have you. I'm honored. And thank you, everyone, for being part of this, whether you're watching now or you will be watching on YouTube. Dr. David Geary. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for attending day one of the virtual conference. Tomorrow morning, according to your conference at a glance, you already have your initial link where you have a pre-recorded session with Dr. Gurian and Dr. Daniel Amen. So please make sure you watch that. And then we will be on directly at 9 o'clock to begin our first session with Dr. Gurian. And so please make sure you complete your survey, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Bye.
All right. Good night.
Thanks. Good night, David. Thank you.
Bye.